Stephen Johnson sunk his teeth into the bloody red steak, ripping a hunk free, as alien eyes stared in horror at the human's ferocious display of carnivorous hunger. "I can't believe it. Humans are carnivorous. I thought they were supposed to be a peaceful, advanced species," Altair whispered, leaning close to his Trill friend Zephyr. The two sat in a booth, picking at their synthesized protein cubes, transfixed by the human tearing into flesh across the bustling intergalactic diner. Zephyr shuddered. "I've heard stories about their violent past, but I never imagined they still consumed flesh. Their delegation claimed they had evolved beyond their primitive savagery." As the human continued stuffing his face with dripping red meat, a nervous Trill waiter approached his table. "Excuse me, sir. We don't serve raw meat here," he stammered. "Perhaps I could interest you in some of our finest synthesized proteins." Stephen looked up, blood smeared on his chin, and let out a guttural chuckle that sent chills down the surrounding aliens' spines. "No thanks, pal. I brought this from home. You see, we humans need real meat to thrive. It's part of our biology." The waiter scuttled away quickly, leaving Altair and Zephyr exchanging horrified glances as they realized they may have severely underestimated the human's predatory nature. If humans required meat to survive, the galaxy's delicate balance was in grave danger. The waiter hurried back to the kitchen, hands trembling from the unsettling encounter. He spotted Xander, the older Trill manager, reviewing inventory on his datapad. "Boss, we've got a situation out there," the waiter said, his voice quivering. Xander looked up, brow furrowed. "What's going on?" "There's a human customer, and he's eating real meat like raw bloody flesh." Xander's eyes widened in disbelief. "A human eating real meat? Here in my restaurant?" He quickly pulled out his tablet and started scrolling through intergalactic regulations. "There must be some rule against this. It's unsanitary. It's barbaric." While Xander frantically searched for any legal recourse, Altair and Zephyr remained fixated on Stephen. The human had struck up a casual conversation with a table of curious Trill nearby. Altair strained to listen, catching snippets of Stephen's explanations about human biology. And that's why we have these sharp teeth called canines," Stephen said, pointing to his blood-stained teeth. "They're perfect for tearing through tough muscle fibers." The Trill at the table looked equal parts fascinated and horrified by the gruesome details. Zephyr leaned closer to Altair and whispered, "I've heard humans are also apex predators on their planet. They domesticated other carnivorous species as pets and hunted animals for sport." Altair shuddered at the thought of such a predatory species walking among them. How had the galactic community misjudged humans so severely? Xander, having found no specific regulations prohibiting the consumption of meat, reluctantly approached Stephen's table. "Sir, while we respect your cultural practices, we kindly ask that you refrain from eating raw flesh in our establishment. It's disturbing the other patrons." Stephen, seemingly understanding the awkwardness of the situation, nodded apologetically. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cause a scene. I'll finish my meal quickly and be on my way." As Stephen took another bite of the dripping steak, a drop of crimson blood fell onto the pristine white tablecloth. A nearby Trill, overwhelmed by the savage display, promptly fainted, collapsing to the floor in a heap. As medics rushed to tend to the unconscious Trill, whispers of the human's shocking dietary revelation spread like wildfire through the space station. Trill residents huddled in corners, their voices low and urgent. "Did you hear about the human in the diner? He was eating actual flesh. I thought they were supposed to be an advanced species. How barbaric. What if they try to eat us next?" Amidst the growing unease, Altair and Zephyr found themselves drawn to the human, their curiosity overpowering their initial disgust. As Stephen exited the diner, the two Trill approached him cautiously. "Excuse me, Mr. Johnson," Altair ventured, his voice trembling slightly. "We couldn't help but overhear your conversation earlier. Is it true that all humans eat meat?" Stephen turned to face them, surprise flickering across his features before being replaced by a gentle smile. "Please, call me Stephen. And yes, most humans are omnivores. We eat both plants and animals. It's been a part of our diet for millions of years." Zephyr, emboldened by Stephen's friendly demeanor, pressed further. "But how do you justify taking the life of another creature for sustenance? Surely your advanced technology has provided alternatives." Stephen paused, considering his response carefully. "You're right, we do have alternatives, but for many of us, eating meat is not just about nutrition. It's a part of our culture, our history. We have a deep respect for the animals we consume, and we strive to raise and harvest them ethically." Altair frowned, struggling to reconcile the concept of respect with the taking of a life. "But don't you feel guilty? Don't you empathize with the animals?" Stephen sighed, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Of course we do. That's why we have strict regulations in place to ensure their well-being, and many humans choose to eat only plant-based diets. But for those of us who do eat meat, we acknowledge the sacrifice and honor the animal's life by not wasting any part of it." As the conversation continued, a small crowd of Trill gathered around, drawn by the unusual sight of their own kind, engaging with the mysterious human. They listened intently, some with expressions of horror, others with rapt fascination, as Stephen patiently explained the intricacies of human omnivory. "You see," he continued, "for centuries our ancestors hunted animals for survival. Over time, as we developed agriculture and animal husbandry, we learned to raise livestock for food. It became a part of our cultural identity, with different regions developing their own unique cuisines and traditions around meat consumption." The Trill murmured amongst themselves, trying to process this new information. Zephyr, still grappling with the concept, asked, "But haven't you evolved past the need for such practices? Surely your society has progressed beyond the barbarism of your past." Stephen chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Progress is not always a straight line. Yes, we have made great strides in technology and social development, but we also recognize the value in preserving certain aspects of our heritage. Eating meat, for many of us, is a way to connect with our past and honor the sacrifices of the animals we consume." As Zara's camera drone zoomed in on Stephen's face, capturing every nuance of his expression, the human took a deep breath and continued his explanation. "You see, for many of us, eating meat is not just a necessity, but a way to connect with our past and honor the animals that sustain us. We have rituals and traditions that emphasize gratitude and respect for the lives we take." Zara, her brow furrowed, interjected, "But in an age of advanced technology and alternative protein sources, surely you can evolve beyond such primitive practices." Stephen shook his head, a patient smile on his face. "It's not about primitiveness or advancement. It's about balance and understanding our place in the natural world. We are not separate from the cycle of life and death, but a part of it." Altair, his eyes wide with dawning comprehension, murmured to Zephyr, "I think I'm starting to understand. They don't see themselves as superior to other creatures, but as interconnected with them." Zephyr nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on Stephen. "It's a humbling perspective, isn't it? To acknowledge one's role in the grand tapestry of life, rather than trying to dominate it." As the impromptu Q&A session continued, more and more Trill gathered around, their initial horror giving way to a grudging respect for the human's thoughtful and nuanced responses. Stephen fielded question after question, his calm demeanor never wavering, even as some of the inquiries grew more pointed and accusatory. "What about the environmental impact of animal agriculture?" one Trill called out. Stephen nodded, acknowledging the concern. "It's a valid point, and one that we're actively working to address. Many humans are adopting plant-based diets or reducing their meat consumption to lessen our ecological footprint. We're also investing in sustainable farming practices and lab-grown meat alternatives." Zara, her journalistic instincts kicking in, pressed further. "But isn't it hypocritical to claim respect for animals while still consuming them?" Stephen paused, considering his words carefully. "I understand how it might seem that way, but for many of us, respect doesn't mean abstaining from meat altogether. It means ensuring that the animals we eat are raised humanely, that they live good lives, and that we use every part of them, wasting nothing. It's about gratitude and mindfulness, not exploitation. As the conversation wore on, Altair and Zephyr found themselves increasingly engrossed, their initial revulsion giving way to a profound fascination. They had come to see humans as a paradoxical species, capable of both great compassion and unflinching pragmatism. Zephyr leaned closer to Altair, his voice low. "I never imagined I would find myself sympathizing with a species that consumes flesh, but the more I listen to Stephen, the more I realize how much thought and care they put into their choices." Altair nodded, his eyes still fixed on the human. It's a reminder that we can't judge an entire species by our own narrow standards. There's so much complexity and nuance to their relationship with the natural world. As Zara and Stephen's spirited debate began to wind down, a sudden commotion erupted from the diner's kitchen. The doors burst open, revealing a group of Trill chefs marching out, holding signs and chanting slogans. Their leader, a young, fiery-eyed Trill named Rio, stepped forward to address the bewildered crowd. "We have heard the humans' words, and we are inspired," Rio declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "For too long our people have been shackled by the societal norms of synthetic food. We have lost touch with our ancestral roots, our primal instincts." The gathered Trill murmured amongst themselves, confusion and uncertainty etched on their faces. Some exchanged nervous glances, while others leaned in closer, intrigued by Rio's impassioned speech. Undeterred by the crowd's mixed reactions, Rio continued, his words growing more fervent with each passing moment. "We demand the right to serve and consume real organic meat in our establishments. We will no longer be oppressed by the tyranny of artificial proteins." Stephen, taken aback by this sudden turn of events, tried to interject. He raised his hands in a placating gesture, his voice calm but firm. "Now hold on a minute. I never meant to inspire a culinary revolution. The choice to eat meat is a deeply personal one, and it shouldn't be taken lightly." But Rio and his supporters were too caught up in their fervor to listen. They began chanting, "Meat is neat, meat is neat," as they marched through the station's corridors, their voices echoing off the metal walls. Altair and Zephyr watched the scene unfold with a mixture of horror and fascination. They turned to each other, their expressions grim. "What have we done?" Zephyr whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "We've unleashed a monster." Altair nodded, his eyes fixed on the retreating backs of the chanting Trill. "I fear this is only the beginning. The human's influence may have unintended consequences for our society." As the chanting crowd disappeared into the distance, Stephen was left standing alone in the diner, grappling with the weight of his words and the realization that his actions may have just upended an entire civilization's way of life. He ran a hand through his hair, his brow furrowed with concern. Zara, her journalistic instincts kicking into high gear, turned to Stephen with a determined look in her eye. "Mr. Johnson, do you have any comment on this unexpected development? How do you feel about potentially being the catalyst for a major cultural shift in Trill society?" Stephen hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I never intended for my personal dietary choices to have such a profound impact. I was simply trying to explain my culture, not encourage others to abandon their own traditions." Altair stepped forward, placing a hand on Stephen's shoulder. "It's not your fault, Stephen. You couldn't have predicted this outcome. But now we must find a way to navigate these uncharted waters and guide our society through this tumultuous time." You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.